Welcome to We Need to Talk, a channel dedicated to figuring out the meaning of life and how to reduce unnecessary suffering. In this episode, we're diving into the topic of whether chasing money is worth it or not. Also, how people are very confused about the goals they're setting, whether they're chasing happiness, fulfillment, or meaning. These are three different things, I think. And also whether university was worth it or not. So if you want to hear about that, stay tuned. Enjoy the episode and don't forget to subscribe. Let's go. What do you think, Lorenzo, should adolescents work for or fight for in their 20s?
So I think actually that kind of goes with the discussion of money, right? So I think quite typically, and this is a number of conversations that we've had as well, is it worth chasing the money um, at a young age, kind of related to that. And I think usually, and I kind of thought about it earlier today, but usually when people chase money, I think what they're really trying to do is they're chasing quality of life. So, and maybe in the past few years now, it's been kind of an equation, right? Quality of life equals money. More money equals an increase of quality of life. Of life. The problem is finding whether that relationship is true. Is more money, does that mean a higher quality of life? And if not, then the teens in their early 20s, mid 20s, if they can find out for themselves, does more money mean greater quality of life? If it's not the case, then they shouldn't go after the money. They shouldn't spend their time now working 90 hours at an investment bank that's going to pay them $250,000, because it's not going to mean they're going to have a greater quality of life, right? Especially if they're spending 90 hours. So I think going back to your question is, what should people be doing in their early 20s, is finding, where am I going to get the best quality of life? Do I need the 10, 20, 100, 200 million pounds to get that quality of life that I want? If not, then don't waste your time, so to speak, chasing the money.
Yeah, nice. I think you said that very well. The classic objective or goal people would gravitate to, I would say, in our society is out of college, how do I make money? Out of university, money. And also, I mean, we can maybe talk about that later. Standard of life, I think, is a synonym for absence of suffering. You want to, if people say, I want financial freedom, no, you want the absence of financial instability. I think that's really what people are looking for. People want a reduction in the stress that they experience. Not necessarily, I mean, what is freedom? Like, it's like, it's a bit intangible. And also, I love what you said with people should essentially experiment to see if the money brings them the whatever you want to call it, the fulfillment, the happiness, the standard of well-being ASAP, so they can tick it off to see, what kind of amount of money they need. And I've thought, you don't really need that much to test something like that. All you need to do is buy something that buy a nice piece of clothing, and then reflect on how it made you feel and how long it made you feel that way. Because likely it'll bring you some satisfaction for a while, but it'll very quickly disappear. It's essentially fleeting. That standard of well-being is elusive. If you're chasing money, you won't really find it in the long term. So it doesn't take much to experiment with that endeavor, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think probably what most people will find, and that's something that I found as well, is now in this environment where we equate more money, higher standard of life, or quality of life, I think early on is true. So I think it is proportional, because if you're earning 10,000 per year and you're using your credit cards, especially in this environment, to pay your rent, you're, I don't know how much in debt, an additional 10,000 that you earn is going to go a long way, right? So initially, I guess the curve from your perspective is kind of like this. So the marginal benefit of earning some more money when you're young and you don't have a lot is going to be quite large. But you're probably going to, through that experimentation, you're probably going to find fairly quickly that you don't need an enormous amount of money. You don't need to be striving for, people comparing themselves to these billionaires or super rich people, thinking this is the optimum because that's where they're going to be super happy. That's probably a mistake, because chances are you don't need that level of financial wealth to be happy, right?
Mm. Yeah, there's that classic. I mean, this is that study that essentially everybody relates to is, yeah, the additional marginal happiness gained from, an increase in 10K of income. It begins to plateau. I think it's 70K. I don't know if it's dollars or euros or pound, British pounds, but it plateaus around 70. And you think 70, well, for some people it's a lot, but for others, it's not that much, but it's a reachable. I need to be super careful with what I say because let's say you can reach 70K in your lifetime, right? So it's not absurdly unattainable or something.
Yeah,
Anyway,
70K per year. Yeah.
yes, yeah, per year. Um, and I think the reason why, one of the key roots why people strive for money is just a lack of, no, I'd say a very suboptimal orientation. They think money will bring them happiness. And even the thing for striving for happiness is also badly formulated, because that's not what will bring you what you really need. Like, it's, you have these words, it's like fulfillment, happiness, meaning, well-being, and they're all kind of in the same trajectory, but they're very different. They imply very different things, and they offer you different kinds of, they have different implications. Like, happiness is an emotion. That's not what you're looking for, because emotions don't stick for very long. And well-being is also, it's just like the absence of suffering, I think, in my eyes. But what you really want is a justification, something that makes life worth living, that you like makes you jump out of bed in the morning. That is what people are unconsciously trying to aim for, I think. And if people understood what that implies, they would have a more accurate aim, I would say.
Yeah. Um, and I think with that, something I read from Ray Dalio, which is you want to aim for doing meaningful work with meaningful people. So meaningful relationships is the word he used. So that's probably what's most meaningful, fulfilling, whatever, one of those words that you used. And maybe less so the money, right? But that kind of relates to what you were just saying, is finding that is probably what the key is. Not trying to be happy at every moment of the day, right? But trying to do something over a longer term, which is building something, whether it's your own thing or being in a company and doing meaningful work that you know you're having an impact on other people, that you're doing something productive, and you're doing it with people, surrounded by people that are meaningful to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say meaning is the right stamp to give the most valuable thing in life, or the thing people are unconsciously striving for. I think, or at least that's what I've concluded after thinking. I think I want to hear what you think. I think the most is, it relates to what you said, the most valuable, or the thing that people should fight for in their 20s is, I called it systematic experimentation with calculated risk. Is basically testing out different ways of life or different experiences systematically. So, you go through the different experiences in a process, but the experiment should have a calculated risk. Like, so I'm not telling you to do cocaine. Like, that's not an experiment I would really condone. I mean, more, try out different social groups, try out different areas of expertise, if different industries, to figure out what suits you. I think that's like, yeah, because the likelihood of knowing what you want in your 20s is super low. And the thing is, well, like, okay, what's worth fighting for in your 20s? Well, that implies you're aiming at something. So it would be good to, like, it's like, okay, what should a 20-year-old aim for? It might be good to figure out what's a good aim. And that you do by figuring out what you like. And that, I think, is most efficiently done by experimentation.
Hmm. And there's two things I wanna comment on. I think that when you say calculated risk, you don't mean, and I wouldn't suggest that that means low risk, right? Because there has to be an element of higher risk, especially if you're young, and especially if you find something that does work well, that you then stop that kind of experimentation process, at least to a degree, and that you stick on one track, right? So let's say for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you jump around, right? You go from one industry to the next, you do 6 months there, a year there. You find exactly for the next 5 years that this particular sector is of interest to you. You want to do this kind of work and you want to live in this kind of area, etc. But once you find that you stick to that one track, that you stop the experimentation, right? Because otherwise, by definition, you'll be kind of balanced out in terms of your skills and expertise over a very broad range, but you'll never have the one expertise which I think you need to have in life to reach that meaningful fulfillment, happiness state.
You'll spread yourself too thin otherwise.
Yeah.
That is
And
a, yeah.
I think that then you become almost like you no longer have, let's say, I guess that's kind of a hard way of saying it, but no identity, right? You don't want to have a bit of everything. You want to have one thing that defines you. Let's say you're an excellent chef, and you want to become a 2 or 3 star Michelin restaurant chef or whatever it is. Then at age 25, you're going to stick to that for the next 10, 12 years. And you're going to, that's going to define you, right? But you don't want to jump around, that you no longer even have an orientation or an identity, that you don't know what your meaning is.
That's the thing. I agree with you for sure. The first with the calculated risk. Calculated risk is just excluding extremely high risk, I would say. So not selling all of your possessions to go and move in with some nomads in Kazakhstan. Like, that's a high risk thing because the likelihood of you not enjoying it in 2 years is very high. That's the thing. When you're in your 20s, or even I'd say between the age of 16 and 30, the amount of times you change as a person, your interests, for example, it's quite frequent. So you're putting all your eggs in one basket at a young age, not a good idea. But um, the thing is, the identity thing, that's a good point. The other, I it's difficult because on the other hand, if you stick to one goal for too long, I think people have the proclivity to derive their identity from the goal despite no longer liking the goal. But they don't want to give up that identity and experiment with something new and take a new step in life because they're afraid of losing their identity, knowing who they are themselves. And I've had that myself. It's actually quite a frightening and difficult thing to let go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that at that point there's a fine balance that that each individual is probably in the best position to see, what that point is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that I mean, when I say stick to your goal, your identity, that can be for, doesn't have to be forever ever, but I just say that has to be, you have to give yourself time to reach real expertise, and right there you need to give yourself that time.
Yeah, you need to
Yeah.
commit to the sprint, or the in agile, commit to the sprint, take responsibility for it. But also the key, which I forgot, is you need to reflect. You need to reflect on how these goals, these experiences make you feel, so you can accurately tick off what you like and what you dislike. Because if you don't reflect on it, and I think a lot of people will spread themselves too thinly and hop around too frequently because they didn't reflect properly. They took they did something and then just jumped onto the next thing without distinguishing, okay, I didn't like this because XYZ. And then you can extrapolate what you learned to see, okay, well, this probably I won't like because it's kind of similar to this. And it's kind of similar to that, but this is quite different. I've never done this. Let me try that. It's just efficient experimentation, I would say. That's
Hmm.
really key. And I just want to like, what are some other examples of experimentation? It's not necessarily job wise, because, you know, when you're 20, 21, 22, you're probably still studying. But I would say different social groups, different kinds of people, different kinds of crazy stuff, like even small things like building a potato cannon. I don't know if we're allowed to say that or not.
Shooting it indoors.
Yeah. Shooting it indoors into the garden. um, Stuff like that, I would say. Really important. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's talk a little bit about what did we get out of our university experience? uh,
Okay, so for me, the most of the value that came from uni was obviously relationships. So, you know, your friends and whatever. And number two is finding um, kind of, and I think everybody will find that naturally, even whether you're in uni or not, but finding your own way, finding your independence, finding what works for you, what doesn't work, seeing where you derive, you know, some satisfaction from, whether it's, you know, professional wise as well. You want to go for working for this kind of company or for that kind of company, or you want to start your own business, like those kind of things. You're in an environment where everybody's discovering that, so you have a lot of people to speak to kind of reflect with. And so that's probably most of the value that I derived from uni. In terms of the academics, I think there's obviously value to that as well, but it's, for me, that was secondary to what I just mentioned.
And can you give examples of like figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just the courses maybe that you're following, or the people, the type of people that you're around, right? So if you're around the kind of people that like to party every other day, um, maybe that's not what you like. You'll quickly find out, right? So then that's something that you can, you know, especially in uni, you can very quickly see, and you know, okay, this is what didn't work for me. Partying every 2 days didn't work for me. Following more of a physics type of course rather than an economics kind of course worked better for me, right? That you kind of, essentially, for me, the university is kind of a testing ground, an experimentation ground that you mentioned earlier, and it enables you to do more of that experimentation in a shorter amount of time because you're in an environment that allows for it.
Mm. You have a lot of possibilities. Yeah, you have all kind of types of people. Subject wise, the thing is, I mean, we had relatively rigid university courses. I mean, the courses were prescribed. We didn't have a choice for the majority of them, and we studied international business and a master's degree in finance. I mean, we didn't really have the opportunity to go into physics or anything like that, I would say. Yet the different types of people, the partying for sure. I mean, I think you and I, we fairly quickly realized how partying was not necessarily our scene. We didn't really derive much value from it. And it came at it was net. I don't want to say it was a net negative experience, but you know, like the individual evening, it's like you go out, drink. I mean, I mean, you for longer than me, but we didn't drink in the last year. So you go out, dance, and then go to bed exhausted and then be tired the next day with like, where was the value? I mean, I enjoyed dancing. Yeah, it's, yeah. Um, but the experimentation, yeah, for sure. I think the academics for me were also, the actual content wasn't too useful. Of course, stuff like one thing super useful, which is quite basic though, but I enjoyed that it was it's good that it was hammered in, was just risk reward trade-offs. Learning that fundamental dynamic of life through finance, that helped me a lot. Just understanding that if somebody's offering you a high reward and opportunity, there's a high risk in it. There has to be a high risk. You don't get a high reward without a high risk, because if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably not true.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yeah,
example,
the high Sharpe ratio thing is kind of environments are usually too good to be true. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's one application I think that, or one example that definitely helps. And yeah, as I said, the content wasn't that useful, I would say, but learning how to study the content, just discipline, focus studying, for sure was helpful. I mean, Lorenzo and I, we spent so many hours in the library in, on university studying with executive meetings in between. We had this spot in the library where we would go after lunch to discuss deep stuff for like another whole hour or something. We'd have like 2 hour lunch breaks. That was awesome. But we
Yeah.
that was excellent studying there, because we started quite early, and we just we just plowed through the content, and then had we had the freedom then on the day before the exam to just go home at like 4 o'clock, which is pretty sick. Where I think the majority of people were panicking at that time.
And studying until 4 in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I mean, it's cool we achieved that, I think. Yeah. What else there was university for me?
Is that your last question?
No, I still have more. Anyway, I mean, the university thing. Is university worth it? Yes or no?
I think now in this environment, no, because you're right. I mean, you can't even do that experimentation that I talked about before. And what you're learning is basically you're getting just the secondary thing, right? The academics. You're not getting the primary thing, which is the experimentation, the kind of finding your path, etc. So for me now, it's not worth it unless for you it's the opposite, right? If the number one priority is the academics, then it's worth it. If it's the other way around, where the academics are secondary, then probably not.
When I see my friends now, who have their university courses purely over Zoom, dude, I struggle. I mean, I don't know how it was for you, but I struggled with 2.5 months left of our master's degree over Zoom. So boring, the lectures. Imagine starting your bachelor's now. So disappointing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could say it's not worth it, but in the normal university situation, definitely worth it. Because what it does also, it buys you time to experiment. Because like if you start a job right after high school, the likelihood of that being the thing for you is quite low. And I would say university gives you more time than a job to experiment. It's just full of opportunities, so you can do really nice trial and error experimentation, which is really excellent, I think.